She thought it would just be another debate, a back-and-forth exchange of ideas, a battle of words, maybe even some heated moments. But what Karoline Leavitt didn't expect, what no one expected, was a live television meltdown so shocking, so unfiltered, that it would end a veteran journalist's career in real time. No second chances, no editing, no damage control. It happened before millions of viewers, and within hours, the internet had declared war. Some called it justice, others called it cancel culture at its worst. But one thing was undeniable: Paul Danning, one of the most recognized TV hosts in the country, was about to be erased. This is the story of how one conversation turned into a career-ending catastrophe, and why the fallout is far from over. Karoline Leavitt had been invited onto The Morning Current, a high-profile political talk show known for its sharp debates and even sharper hosts. Across from her sat Paul Danning, a veteran journalist with decades of experience. He wasn't just a moderator, he was a combatant, someone who thrived on pressure and knew how to push his guests to the edge. And this time his target was a young, rising conservative voice who wasn't about to back down. From the very start, the interview had tension. Paul pressed Karoline on media bias, accusing conservative outlets of spreading misinformation while insisting that networks like his were merely correcting the record. Karoline didn't flinch. She came prepared, listing examples where mainstream media had distorted stories, buried facts, or outright misled the public. The conversation was heated but still controlled, and then it wasn't. Paul leaned in, his voice hardening, his frustration barely concealed. "People like you," he said, his tone dripping with irritation, "are the reason this country is backsliding. You push this fake narrative of victimhood, pretending conservatives are being silenced, when in reality, you're the one silencing everyone else." The studio went silent. A moment of dead air that felt like an eternity. Karoline's expression barely changed, but her eyes sharpened. She let the weight of his words hang in the air before responding, her voice calm but deliberate. "Excuse me?" Paul didn't back down. In fact, he doubled down. "You act like free speech is under attack, but what you really want is control. Your people—" He stopped, but it was too late. A single phrase, 2 words, "your people." The second they left his mouth, something shifted. The producers, who had been passively observing, suddenly exchanged glances. The crew members tensed. Everyone in that studio realized in real time that something had just gone horribly wrong. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. Instead, she leaned back and asked, "Would you like to clarify what you mean by 'your people'?" Paul hesitated, just for a second, but that second was all it took. The cameras were still rolling, the internet was watching, and suddenly the man who had spent decades controlling conversations had completely lost control of his own. Paul exhaled sharply. He tried to course correct. "I meant conservatives," he said quickly. "People like you who push an agenda of grievance instead of progress." Karoline didn't let it slide. "So just to be clear," she said, "when you said 'your people,' you were only referring to political ideology?" Paul's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew a trap when he saw one. If he pushed back, he'd confirm what people were already thinking. If he admitted it was a mistake, he'd look weak. So he tried a different tactic: deflection. "Oh, come on, Karoline, don't play the victim here," he scoffed. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This bad faith outrage. You know exactly what I meant." Karoline didn't blink. "I don't need to twist anything, Paul. Your words speak for themselves." And then he made the fatal mistake. Paul rolled his shoulders back, exhaling in frustration. "You know what? Maybe if conservatives spent less time playing the victim and more time actually contributing something to society, we wouldn't be having this conversation." There it was, live, unedited, permanent. The studio fell into a suffocating silence. Even Paul seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had just said. His lips parted slightly as if to soften the blow, but it was too late. The moment the segment ended, the internet erupted. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. A 15-second snippet of Paul's words. "Maybe if conservatives spent less time playing the victim and more time actually contributing something to society," spread like wildfire. No context, no prelude, just that sentence. The hashtag started trending. "Fire Paul Danning. Media bias exposed." Karoline was right. Sponsors took notice. By midday, 3 major advertisers had suspended their partnerships. By evening, 5 more had pulled out entirely. The network went into crisis mode. And Karoline, she didn't have to say a word. She simply retweeted the clip with nothing but a thinking face emoji At 3 p.m., the network released a carefully worded statement. Paul Danning has been placed on indefinite suspension while we conduct an internal review. It was corporate speak for "we're seeing how bad this gets before we fire him." But the internet wasn't satisfied. People wanted him gone. The next morning, the final decision was made. At 9:15 a.m., the network announced, effective immediately, Paul Danning is no longer affiliated with NBS News. Just like that, his career was over. Some called it justice. A reckoning for media arrogance, proof that powerful voices couldn't get away with looking down on half the country anymore. Others called it cancel culture at its worst. So a man loses his job for one comment? What happened to debate? What happened to context? Right-wing commentators went all in, painting Karoline Leavitt as the woman who took down Paul Danning. Meanwhile, Paul resurfaced a month later, this time on his own YouTube channel, branding himself as a truth-teller silenced by the establishment. His audience? Bigger than ever. And Karoline, she moved on, but she would forever be tied to this moment. She hadn't just debated a TV host, she had changed the game. So now, the question is yours. Was this justice, or was this a dangerous precedent? Did Paul Danning's firing restore accountability, or did it prove that public pressure controls the media? One thing's for sure, this won't be the last time something like this happens, and when it does, whose side will you be on? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make you think.